a submarine that carries more missiles than any attack boat in the current American fleet. That's the idea now taking shape inside the U.S. Navy's undersea warfare offices. Not a finished submarine. Not yet a name, a number, or a launch date. According to USNI News, the Navy is exploring an advanced payload launcher system, a new way to pack additional missile capacity into the attack submarines that will follow the Virginia-class line. The question this video sets out to answer is simple to ask and hard to answer honestly. Why does the world's most capable submarine force feel it needs to carry more at a moment when it already has fewer boats than it wants? Over the next few minutes, we'll walk through what an advanced payload launcher actually is in plain terms, how it compares with a system the Navy already uses today called the Virginia Payload Module, and why this idea is surfacing now instead of 5 years ago or 5 years from now. We'll also be honest about the limits of what is public. This is a program that, as of today, lives in the concept and requirement stage. Not a finalized design, not a contract, not steel cut in a shipyard. Understanding that distinction is the difference between reporting the story straight and getting ahead of it. Let's start with what is actually confirmed. USNI News, a defense-focused outlet that closely tracks Navy shipbuilding and procurement, reports that the Navy is examining an advanced payload launcher intended for its future attack submarine fleet. The stated goal, according to that reporting, is to expand the missile-carrying capacity of the boats that come after the Virginia class. That's the extent of the confirmed, sourced fact pattern. The specifics. How many additional missiles, what dimensions, what class of submarine will ultimately carry it, aren't yet public, and a careful viewer should be suspicious of any video that claims otherwise. We went through publicly available Navy shipbuilding plans and congressional budget justification documents to understand the context this idea is emerging from, and one detail kept surfacing. The U.S. attack submarine force is shrinking, and it has been shrinking for years, even as demand for submarines in the Indo-Pacific region keeps rising. That gap between what the fleet has and what combatant commanders say they need is the backdrop this new launcher idea has to be understood against. To explain why a bigger payload launcher even matters, it helps to know what a Virginia-class attack submarine looks like today. Virginia-class boats are nuclear-powered, roughly 7,800 tons submerged, and they're the backbone of the current U.S. attack submarine force, gradually replacing the older Los Angeles-class boats that have been retiring for 2 decades. Early Virginia-class submarines carried 12 vertical launch tubes for Tomahawk cruise missiles, plus torpedo tubes used for both torpedoes and additional cruise missiles fired through them. 12 vertical launch tubes is a meaningful number, but it's a fraction of what a dedicated missile submarine can carry. That's where the Virginia Payload Module comes in, and it's the clearest real-world comparison point for understanding what an advanced payload launcher might build on. Starting with the Block V batch of Virginia-class submarines, the Navy inserted an extra hull section amidships containing 4 additional large-diameter tubes. Each tube can hold 7 Tomahawk cruise missiles, using a design the Navy calls the Virginia Payload Tube. That addition alone raises the Tomahawk carrying capacity of a Block V boat from 12 missiles to around 40. In plain terms, the Navy already proved, with the Virginia Payload Module, that inserting a new payload section into an attack submarine's hull works. An advanced payload launcher, whatever its final form, would build on that same basic idea. More missile capacity, achieved through a dedicated payload section rather than cramming more into the existing torpedo room. None of this has come easily, and that's worth stating plainly rather than glossing over. The Virginia Payload Module program itself ran into real, publicly documented strain. The U.S. Submarine Industrial Base, principally General Dynamics Electric Boat in Connecticut and Rhode Island, and HI's Newport News Shipbuilding in Virginia, has struggled for years to hit its delivery targets for both Virginia-class attack submarines and the new Columbia-class ballistic missile submarines, which the Navy has designated its top acquisition priority. Skilled welders, machinists, and engineers have been in short supply. Suppliers have missed deadlines. The Navy's own reporting to Congress has repeatedly flagged Virginia-class deliveries running behind schedule. Any new payload launcher program will be competing for the same finite shipyard capacity, the same limited pool of specialized labor, and the same defense budget lines that Columbia-class construction already claims first. So the Navy has a proven method for adding missile capacity to an attack submarine, and an industrial base that's already stretched thin building the boats it has already committed to. That tension, ambition running ahead of shipyard capacity, isn't new. What's new is the reason the Navy is willing to take on that tension again, And that reason has a name most defense watchers already know: the Indo-Pacific. USNI News situates this story against the Navy's declining attack submarine fleet size, set against rising demands from Indo-Pacific deterrence missions. That's well-established, independently reported context, not a claim unique to this one story. The U.S. Navy has stated for years, in testimony before Congress and in its own force structure assessments, that it wants roughly 66 attack submarines. The actual number in service has hovered well below 50, and it's expected to dip further before Virginia-class production can outpace the retirement of aging Los Angeles-class boats. Meanwhile, China has been expanding its own Navy at a pace that outside analysts, including the Pentagon's own annual report on Chinese military power, describe as the largest shipbuilding effort of any navy in the world. Submarines are hard to detect and can hold a wide area at risk with long-range missiles, which makes them one of the few platforms that can offset a numbers disadvantage in surface ships. Fewer hulls, each carrying more missiles, is one way to try to close that gap without simply building more submarines faster than the shipyards allow, which right now they can't. What strikes us about this story is how much it reveals about the Navy's current constraints rather than its ambitions. A wealthier, less constrained Navy facing this same strategic problem might just order more submarines. Instead, the solution being explored here is to make each existing hull do more. And that tells you as much about the limits of American shipyards in 2026 as it does about any single weapons system. There's also a program already running that's worth mentioning as context, because outside observers sometimes conflate it with anything involving next-generation attack submarines. SSN-X, the Navy's formal effort to design a wholly new class of attack submarine to eventually replace the Virginia-class outright. SSN-X has been in early design and requirements work for several years, and Navy officials have discussed it in unclassified budget testimony, though a construction contract and a settled design remain well in the future. It isn't yet publicly confirmed whether the advanced payload launcher being explored is intended specifically for SSN-X, for a further modified Virginia-class variant, or for some other future hull. USNI News' reporting describes it as intended for the boats that follow the Virginia-class, language broad enough to cover more than one possible outcome, and a careful viewer shouldn't assume more precision than the sourcing actually offers. Most people assume that when the Navy says it's exploring a new weapons system, engineers somewhere already have a design on a drawing board and a submarine to bolt it onto. That's usually not how early Navy acquisition works. Programs at the concept and requirement stage typically involve studying operational needs, running feasibility assessments, and drafting the requirements documents that will eventually shape a formal contract, well before any hull form or missile count is locked in. It's entirely possible for an idea like this to be studied for years, modified substantially, folded into another program, or shelved before a single tube is ever built. That uncertainty isn't a weakness in the reporting. It's the honest state of an early-stage defense program, and it sets up the one part of this story that's genuinely worth debating, because reasonable people who follow naval strategy don't all agree on it. Here's the take that will probably get us some pushback. Pouring engineering effort into giving manned attack submarines even more missile tubes may be solving a version of the problem the Navy already knows how to solve, while a harder, less comfortable question gets less public attention because it's harder to put a number on. How uncrewed underwater vehicles and distributed sensor networks change what submarine warfare even looks like in the next 20 years. More missiles per hull is an answer with a clean acquisition line and a familiar procurement process behind it. Whether it's the right answer is a separate question, worth asking rather than assuming. So we'll put it to you directly. Given a shrinking submarine fleet and a rising demand signal from the Pacific, do you think the right move is packing more missiles into the boats the Navy already knows how to build? Or should more of that investment go toward unmanned underwater systems instead? We read the comments, and this is a debate worth having with real arguments on both sides, not a rhetorical question. One detail that stuck with us while researching this: the same USNI News reporting that describes this new launcher effort also frames it against the backdrop of a Navy that is, by its own admission, facing a submarine shortfall it doesn't expect to fully close until the 2030s at the earliest, even under optimistic shipbuilding assumptions. That's not speculation on our part. It reflects publicly stated Navy shipbuilding plans and independent analyses from organizations like the Congressional Research Service, which tracks submarine force structure closely and publishes unclassified reports on it every year. There's a technical obstacle worth naming plainly too, because it's not a small one. Fitting a larger payload section into a submarine hull isn't simply a matter of welding in a bigger tube. Naval architects have to account for how additional weight and length change a submarine's buoyancy, its handling underwater, its acoustic signature, and its structural strength under the crushing pressure of deep water. The Virginia payload module took years of engineering work before it was fitted to Block V boats, precisely because those trade-offs have to be solved correctly the first time. A submarine hull isn't a system where mistakes get discovered and fixed on the next production run without enormous cost. So where does that leave the actual state of this program right now, separated cleanly from everything around it? Confirmed. USNI News reports the Navy is exploring an advanced payload launcher meant to expand missile capacity on future attack submarines beyond the Virginia class, driven by the shrinking size of the attack submarine fleet and rising Indo-Pacific deterrence demands. Not yet confirmed, and not stated by the source, the exact missile capacity being targeted, which future hull or program it will ultimately be paired with, a timeline for a design decision, or a cost estimate. Anyone presenting those specifics as settled fact right now is going beyond what the public record supports. That gap between what's known and what's still being worked out is, frankly, the normal condition for a defense program this early. The Virginia payload module itself went through years of study before it appeared on a real submarine. SSNX has been in requirements development for the better part of a decade without a construction contract. Big shifts in how the U.S. Navy builds and arms its submarines tend to move slowly in public view and then arrive, once funded and contracted, all at once. Put yourself in the position of a Navy requirements officer working this problem today. You have a combatant commander in the Pacific asking for more missile-carrying submarines than the fleet has, a shipbuilding industrial base already straining to deliver the boats already on contract, and a strategic competitor expanding its Navy faster than almost anyone predicted 5 years ago. An advanced payload launcher, if it works and if it can actually be built without further overloading Electric Boat and Newport News, is one of the few ways to add firepower without needing an entirely new hull built from scratch. That's the practical logic behind this story, even before a single design detail becomes public. For now, this is what the record actually supports: an idea in the concept and requirements stage, not a finished weapons system, aimed at giving the submarines that follow the Virginia-class more missile capacity than they carry today. Whether it becomes the next Virginia payload module, a real, fielded addition to the fleet, or one of the many early-stage Navy concepts that gets folded into a different program down the road, is genuinely not yet known, and we'll be straight with you either way when more of this becomes public. There's more in the underlying budget documents and congressional testimony than we could responsibly fit into one factual video without speculating past what's confirmed. Comment below if you want to follow up once the Navy's requirements work on this program becomes clearer. If you want to verify any of this yourself rather than take our word for it, the primary sources are listed below, and we'd genuinely rather you check them than simply trust a YouTube video, ours included. Subscribe if you want the next update on this story the moment there's one worth reporting.